What does it take to make workshops work? And how can we facilitate collaboration that sticks and leads to results? My name is Miriam Happens, and with the Workshops Work podcast, I'm on a mission to find the magic ingredient to make workshops work. Today with me on the show is Britt Andreatta, and we are talking about how to get to the real purpose of the workshop by asking your client some diagnostic questions to make sure that the group gets the results they need. So lean back and enjoy the show. And by the way, if you don't have pen and paper at hand to take your own notes, why don't you just enjoy the show, visit workshops.work and download my one-page summary. And you might also find some freebies that Britt provided for you. Enjoy. Britt, I'm so happy to have you here today.
Same here. It's really lovely to meet you, and I'm excited to connect with your followers.
Yes, I stumbled upon your LinkedIn course about workshop facilitation that reached a couple of million people already.
Yeah, it's a collection of my courses have hit the millions. I think this individual course is around 50,000 now. Wow. Between lynda.com and LinkedIn Learning. But I also have one on how to create a culture of learning and organizational learning and development, leading with emotional intelligence. So it's really wonderful to use a platform like that to reach lots of people.
Yeah, wonderful. I was grateful for the insight that you shared. So what got you into facilitation in the first place?
I started off probably professionally as a graduate student being a teaching assistant and working that way. But, when I look back over my childhood, I was always the kid that kind of explained things to other kids. And it's always been there a little bit of liking to help people. And I think, that's the difference for me is that facilitation is about helping people through the whole experience, not just telling them stuff.
Yeah. And you've been a chief learning officer before. And This is about telling people, right? So if you're teaching, you're telling people, whereas facilitating, you make the learning journey easy. What have you learned in your role as a chief learning officer about facilitation?
Well, I think, lots of things, actually. I think that the biggest thing is to get clear about the results that you want to have, and really looking at the words and actions that you're trying to drive and what measurable data you're going to go to. I always start with that and then work backwards, because once you're clear on the outcome, then what you design, whether it's your learning strategy for the whole organization or a series of trainings or a specific workshop, start with what you're trying to create and work backwards. And then also in my role, I learned that all the bells and whistles that are available to us through different kinds of technology, that while they can make things sparkle, they don't necessarily create good learning. That you really have to go back to what are we trying to create and where are people now and how do I bridge that gap? I think a lot of people lean on those fancy bells and whistles to fix bad design, but if the design isn't good, all the bells and whistles in the world don't make it fantastic.
And this makes me think, so what I experienced recently with the crisis is that we have to move all of our workshops and trainings online. So what do you think is in the structure and the design different? What is it what you have to keep in mind when you design something for the online versus the offline space?
It's a great question. It still depends on what you're trying to teach or train. Because the topic, is very much part of what you're getting at and who your audience is. But generally when you're online, because you're missing all the neurological things that happen when people are together, I find that I have to have many more visuals to keep things interesting and then try to have people on camera so that people can see other humans. I have to go at a faster pace with online learning to keep the interest level, and I have to usually change the interaction pieces to be much more clear and engaging, because you can't, you're not standing in the room and fixing it live. You kind of have to really think through some of those pieces. But I find it's many more points of interaction, faster pace, higher energy.
Yeah.
And some things should not go online because you're going to lose some stuff altogether. So I also, in this time of this global pandemic, which I think a lot of people are dealing with, a lot of folks are trying to put everything online, and some stuff, wait till we're through this, because some things should really still be delivered in person. And also, I think right now people are really overwhelmed by what's happening in the world. And while they have quote unquote open time in their schedule, maybe we should just let folks have some space to breathe and not necessarily shove them into a bunch of trainings just to keep things moving.
Yeah.
I think there needs to be some sensitivity to that.
Yeah. And I can totally relate to what you said, that it doesn't always make sense to move things online. So, and then I think of what you shared beforehand, it always depends on the purpose. So I had a conversation with a client and thinking, should we put a training course, which is a summer school, should we have it virtually? And then we realized that the purpose is less educational than relational. So we want to create a network of deep relationships. And it would be such a challenge to replicate that in the virtual world that we decided that it doesn't make sense.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you stopped to think that through because, for example, I design a lot of brain-based manager trainings. And yeah, technically I can still deliver the content virtually. But a lot of what happens when you bring managers together is, in addition to the rich activities we have them doing at the table, is that when it's break time, they wander off and continue the conversation. Or when they have dinner together, because we're all staying at the same hotel, a lot happens in those moments that's relationship building and really driving the culture. Yeah. And so if relationships or culture are involved, then you really need to think about what pieces can you use together. Yeah. So a lot of organizations, I'm getting calls from lots of organizations right now thinking this through, and virtual absolutely plays an important role. And I think many people are having great breakthrough experiences realizing they can connect online in ways they couldn't before. But you have to be really careful that you don't just convert every training to an online training.
So what I hear is that, especially in this situation, it's very important for you to help your clients to define the real purpose of their workshop.
Absolutely.
And or their training or their gathering.
Yeah, so, and that's true no matter what.
Yeah. So your client calls you and says, okay, we need to have this training or workshop or whatsoever, and we want to put it virtually. How do you actually help them to reflect on the purpose, whether it makes sense to do that shift?
Yeah, so most clients, whether they're in-house or external, call you and say, hey, we've got X problem and we want this workshop on communication skills. Mm-hmm. And so instead of just jumping in and saying, great, I have one on communication skills, what day do you want to offer it? I stop and say, well, do you mind if I ask you a few questions just so I can get really clear about what you're trying to achieve? Mm-hmm. And so then I ask them diagnostic questions around, okay, what's not happening that you want to see happen, or what's happening that you want to see more or less of? You know, I try to get specifics into what behaviors, words, and actions you want to see if everything was going well. You know, what is the ideal outcome you're trying to get at? How can we measure it? What would it look like? I also ask a bunch of questions about, is there anyone doing that well now? You know, do you have pockets of excellence that we could leverage or see what they're doing differently? Who really needs the training? So I take them through a series of questions where I'm really unattached. You know, I don't have a certain thing I'm pushing. I'm just trying to help them get really clear about what's underneath. And 99% of the time, by the time we're done with the questions, it's not a communication workshop. It's not the thing that they came in asking for. Yeah. It's something else entirely. And so usually they're really grateful for that process. And I am too, because now I know I'll hit the mark. Where before I started asking these questions, I would deliver a great communication workshop and they'd be like, it was good, but it didn't quite do what we were hoping for. And it was in my younger career that I realized, okay, I need to help them get clear about what they don't know or what they haven't brought to the surface yet. So those questions are really important. And we're going to share them with your listeners as the thing that we're giving as a chapter from my book.
Wonderful. I will put the link in the show notes. They will be happy. And when I think of this process that you go through with your clients beforehand, it almost sounds like a coaching session. So would you then put the hat of a coach on, or do you believe that maybe a facilitator is or must also be a coach?
Well, for me, the definition of a coach is someone who asks clarity questions and helps the person get in touch with their own inner knowing or wisdom. Mm-hmm. So for me, it's a little bit of both. I'm asking some diagnostic questions that help them identify some specific data points or specific things. And then I also will ask coaching questions, which really helps them get clear about what they already know or what they believe to be true or what their gut instinct is. So it's a little bit of a blend.
Do you encounter resistance of these leaders? Because I have the impression very often also from a behavioral perspective, we like to solve the easiest questions. And sometimes we feel resistance in actually admitting to ourselves where the real problem lies. So when they first give you a call to ask you for a communication workshop, maybe their deepest wish is that it's only a matter of communication, because this would mean that they don't have a toxic culture.
Absolutely. You're right. So part of it is, and this I can kind of rest on now because of my years experience and my status as a leader in the industry. People call specifically me because they want to tap into that expertise. But when I was younger and I didn't have that, I definitely, you definitely have to tread that a little carefully, right? But at the same time, if you don't address the real problem, which is the toxic culture, they're not going to get what they want. You're not going to be able to design the workshop that really works, and it's going to be a mess anyway. So I just found kind of gentle ways to bring those questions up or to highlight for them, well, if people aren't really feeling safe with each other, then we can't really accomplish this in the workshop, for example. So I think facilitators, for all of us, when we're engaging in that intake experience, we have to be willing to tell the truth, truth with kindness, be gentle, but also not find ourselves agreeing to do stuff that in our gut we know is not going to deliver the real workshop. And it has meant that I've sometimes said to clients, I don't feel comfortable moving forward with that unless we also tackle this. And sometimes they're like, okay, well, sometimes you have to part ways because you know it's not going to be successful. Or sometimes you can say, hey, how about if we do this and then add this and this to it? Can we approach it that way? Usually when I'm working with learning professionals, if they're the ones calling me, they already know what's going on, right? And they're bringing me in from the outside to help them address something that's already there. And they're grateful to have an outside voice kind of adding into what they've been saying. I think the hardest is when you're dealing with like the CEO of the company and they're the ones calling you and they want X and they're really attached to it. Depending on how coachable they are and if they're open to digging deeper, you'll either be able to design the thing they want or you're seeing the very problem play itself out before your very eyes.
And I would be curious. So one part of the facilitation practice or at heart is creating the psychological safety for the group. And now it seems as if you, before that, have to create this psychological safety for the leader.
Absolutely.
Feel safe enough to actually go with you through this journey of identifying the real purpose. What are the differences in terms of design or approach that you would use when you create psychological safety for a group versus for one leader? Or is it the same?
Well, I mean, psychological safety is people feeling that they're safe enough that they can speak up with questions or concerns or mistakes without fear of something, rejection, career harm, whatever it is.
Judgment.
Yeah. So real learning has to have psychological safety. And it's why in my book, Wired to Grow, psychological safety is the field in which learning sits, because without it, you can't really have great learning. So when I'm talking to the person who called me, I'm really just trying to be very authentic and share with them like, okay, in my experience, we want to make sure we get at anything underneath what's happening or what could be some potential roadblocks. I'll ask point blank, what's the relationship of the people in the room? Is there any harm in that relationship that's happened? How much trust do people have? I have to ask those questions because they're in the room whether we talk about them or not.
Yes.
So, but I just try to make it easy to talk about them without blame or anything. But then, that's part of the real context in which the workshop will exist. So we need to address it to make the workshop successful. I have not found very many people aren't willing to talk about it. They're actually eager to talk about it. They're just not sure what to do about it. And so that's where then I can talk about, well, why don't we first do this and then we can move to that? If you want to get at communication, fine, but let's first approach it here, start the day with this and move there. And then, you can't just instantly create psychological safety amongst a group of people who have a lot of damage in their relationship. As a workshop facilitator, you can't just walk in the room and magically fix that.
Why not?
But sometimes in my intake call, I'm explaining how important it is that we spend the time fixing those relationships or what we can do to start to address that. And those are really important conversations.
What if the leader, the workshop, your client is actually part of the problem? So they describe what they believe the problem is, but they have their perspectives and blind spots. And I think very few people do have the awareness to realize that they might be the problem of communication. How would you address that?
Well, some of it comes up in the diagnostic questions, right? The way you ask things and who's doing it well and what's missing and stuff. The other thing I always insist on is that I get an opportunity to speak to the people who will be attending the workshop, because that helps me. There's the way the leader sees it, and then there's the way people experience it, and I have to solve for the gap in between, right? I can't just offer a workshop based on the leader's perspective, because that'll miss the mark. And I can't just offer it based on the employee's perspective either, because the leader has real concerns. So usually, I'll ask those diagnostic questions, then I ask to speak to some of the participants, and then I'll go back to the original person and say, okay, here's some gaps I'm identifying. And, I'll put myself in that position of delivering some of that news and talking about how we need to address those things. And I haven't found that people are too resistant to hearing it. But sometimes they do struggle with, well, I just wanted to have a workshop on communication. Can't we just do that? And then I have to say, well, we can, but you're not going to get the results that you're trying to get at. So do you want to tackle that? Or can we at least start to work on this? And sometimes I'm having to have a hard conversation with them like, hey, the manager of this group has done a lot of damage. You've had a lot of turnover with this person. They've engagement is low amongst the group. What's going on with you that you're not addressing this? What's going on that you haven't managed this person differently yet, because I can't magically go in and undo that damage. So it becomes some hard conversations, but I feel like we're getting really deep. Like not all of them go like this, but you're kind of tackling some of the hard topics where it's revealing that there's something that needs to be addressed. And usually the call, I'm just saying, hey, I think in your gut that this, we can't do this or we have to approach it this way. And usually they're like, yeah, I do. I was just, So then I'm trying to help them find a way forward.
And I think, of course, it's luckily not the case in every workshop that we facilitate or design or prepare, that we run into these situations. But I think it's one of the most difficult ones. And I recently had a conversation, I think it was with Owen, when he described the facilitator also as a lifeguard. So once you step into the room, you have this responsibility to create the safety. So I think to approach it from your direction, to really understand where are the problems in the leader, in order not to design a collaborative session, then basically let the group run into the risk of hitting a wall.
Yeah. And if there's not a lot of safety, there's lots of things you can do with activities and things to bring it out. So like one of my favorite activities to do for almost any topic, but certainly when there's these issues, I like to do the gallery walk. So you ask people a question and maybe I'll ask people 4 questions and they get 4 different colors of Post-it notes. And they get to answer them anonymously. I collect them so that no one sees who wrote what, and then I repost them around the wall. And then we spend 30 minutes, 20 minutes silently, no one can talk, going around and reading what people said. And inevitably, that brings out some really big aha moments or shares that people, and if we're even addressing, like, I'll even ask the question, how safe do you feel to speak up in this group? Or what happens when people speak up in this group? Mm-hmm. And people will put, what's really happening. Like, it's pretty amazing with the protection of anonymity, mm-hmm. people will tell the truth. Mm-hmm. And then I'm there to facilitate, what did you notice? What do you think this means about your culture? What do you think needs to happen? And gallery walks, I think, can be really great tools to help bring the real issues out into the room.
And it's introvert friendly. Yes. And it allows everyone to first sit with it and reflect.
Yes. And also they also get to choose what they write. So if someone doesn't truly feel comfortable writing the truth, they'll write something else. That's okay. But inevitably, enough of the themes come out that, there's enough there to work with.
And then there's also so much meaning hiding behind buzzwords or in between words that you can then, as a bold facilitator, bring up to when you see that it's, and I'm lacking an example, but sometimes I have the impression that you read a sentence and you can almost hear that it means something else, something deeper, but this person didn't dare to write it down. So then you can easily facilitate a conversation around it, maybe to dig deeper.
Yeah. And then that's also where you can say, okay, you all read what was up online. Let's take these 3 comments. I want you to get into dyads or triads. Mm-hmm. What do you think that person was referring to? What are some examples you've seen? What are blah, blah, blah. And so then it allows more voices to come into the room. Yeah, absolutely. And I think good facilitators pick up on those things and use them as opportunities to move the group forward.
Do you ever feel you're tired of the trip from home to the home office? That the physical confines of your house are not getting you the exposure to the new ideas that you need? Maybe you need Mastermind. At Mastermind, you work together with a group of peers who help you bring new perspectives to your challenges, to find new solutions, and who you can even give a little bit back to by helping them solve their problems. In a compressed 2 hours, you'll get a day's worth of learning. So why don't you get out of that box and come to Mastermind? workshops.work/mastermind.
In talking about getting all the voices heard, and you mentioned that you're speaking to the leader and to the participants as well. And I wondered, how can you make sure that you find the right participants to be in the room, but also the right participants to talk to? Because I can imagine, again, thinking of this worst case scenario where you have the toxic leader. He or she will appoint you, obviously, to speak to those persons they trust, but they might not represent the group. So how do you select those you would interview?
Well, I'll usually ask, who's doing this well? Who are the pockets of excellence? Who do you think I should talk to? And then who's really struggling with this? Who's not performing at the level you want? Usually they're trying to solve some problem, right? So I'll try to speak to those folks. And then when I'm speaking to the folks of the names they gave me, I always ask those people, who else should I talk to? Can you make an introduction?
That's sneaky.
So inevitably I get to the right people. Sometimes I'll say, is it okay if I do a SurveyMonkey survey with your folks ahead of time? And if I'm working with someone in HR or learning and development, they usually kind of know the backstory on everything. So I can talk to them. So yeah, I'll just try to get more information as I, work through it and make sure I'm hitting the mark. Because I have, everyone, the person paying for it, the person who called me, and the participants all have to walk away feeling like they got something out of the event. Yeah. So I have to be listening to all of them and designing for what will achieve most of those pieces.
According to you, what makes a workshop fail?
Not listening. I mean, if to all those people I just talked about, it's not listening to what is being said in your preparation and then not listening in the room. So if you just kind of got glommed to, okay, I'm doing a communication skills workshop, and you don't listen to the other pieces, you're going to miss the mark. Even if your workshop was amazing, it's going to miss the mark. And then if in the room, I always go into every situation with, here's plan A, but I have plan B and plan C in my pocket. Because you have to pivot to what's going on in the room. And I think that it's that flexibility that allows you to really hit the mark, as opposed to being so stuck in your agenda or your timeline that you don't flex for where the real stuff is happening. So I think when workshops fail, for the most part, it's because you didn't listen at one point there somewhere. They can fail for other reasons, like your handouts didn't arrive, or, there can be little roadblocks that can threaten you. But I think at the core of it, it's not really listening to what's being said.
And is there one moment that or at the end when you evaluate the workshop for yourself, you step out of the room, you come home, you relax, and then there's this moment, it doesn't feel right, it didn't really work. What would trigger?
So I don't have that happen too much. In fact, it hasn't happened in a long time. I usually feel really good about what happened. The only kind of that ever happens to me is, I think I'm going to tighten up that exercise a little bit, or, I'm going to try to find a different graphic there. But I'm also at the stage of my career where I've done so many workshops and I've learned over time that I think I've kind of got a good rhythm. I think in my earlier days, that feeling of, was when I realized there was something there was a thing underneath, and I was discovering it live in the presentation. And that's why I got much more committed to asking the diagnostic and coaching questions up front, because I didn't want to have that moment. And I felt like there was no reason that moment should happen. Like, you should really know what's happening. And inevitably, kind of going back to the earlier scenario you were talking about, if a leader's not really on board for tackling the real issue, they just want to have communication skills, then before we ever get in the room, I really frame, okay, I can do this, but I just really want an expectation set. You're likely to get this kind of feedback, or you're likely to see this kind of engagement or disengagement. Are you on board for that? So that later when it pans out, first of all, it further illustrates that I was right, or that I was tuned into what was going on. And they've had a moment where they've chosen, so that they expect it, or they're not surprised when it happens.
Yeah. And what I hear is this growth or learning journey that you went through, from realizing, okay, the workshop didn't work in the past because I didn't really tap into, I need to fix that. Okay, what is the strategy? I need my diagnostic questions. And I need to be bold enough and create the space for the leader in order to share this with me as a facilitator. What do you think is
Well, I would say one more thing, which is, what I'm known for is using neuroscience and bringing the neuroscience of success into the conversation. All 3 books of mine are about the neuroscience of learning, the neuroscience of change, the neuroscience of teams. So inevitably, I'm bringing that to the conversation too, which is like, we have to understand how people really work and the biology of how people are. So if they don't feel safe, they're not going to be able to really be innovative, because they're in their amygdala, reptilian brain, and that's what's going on. So I'm able to also use that knowledge that I have to help them understand why some of these issues are so important. And that all happens in the preparation phase. And inevitably, most of my workshops now include elements of neuroscience in them, because that's what people are coming to me for. But before I had that in my cadre, it was still about kind of using your understanding of people and what allows people to be fully present in an event and get the results you want. So I'm not saying y'all need to have neuroscience, because those of you who are good facilitators, you've kind of learned all these tricks through trial and error. You've had a good instinct. You've had a good gut instinct where you were reading the room really well, and you've been doing it your whole careers. But for me, when I can give people the scientific reason behind some of these things, it allows folks to get on board a little more easily than they did before.
And what you described now is a toolkit or skill set that got you through this learning and growth journey. What is the mindset that you had to cultivate to now not having this feeling of failure at the end of the workshop, but walking out of every workshop with a feeling of satisfaction?
For me, it was always about meeting people where they're at. You have to have the workshop start where people are really at, and you have to be really clear about where you're trying to get them to move to. And if that's a really big distance, then we're talking about 3 workshops, not 1 workshop. Mm-hmm. If it's a shorter distance, then yeah, it's doable. So it was just really about kind of articulating more clearly what it is that I can do for people, and asking those questions so that we're aligned and getting all those expectations worked out in advance. So yeah, now it's, it's really easy. I mean, there's really no situation that scares me anymore. And, I've dealt with some interesting doozies too, like literally blackout in the middle of the presentation, 2,000 people in the room. This cannot be rescheduled. And I have to keep giving the training. And we did. I just turned my laptop around and they could see the glow of my screen, and we illuminated the room with cell phones, and I kept training.
A literal blackout, yeah.
Yeah, not ideal, but it worked. And people still to this day talk about that workshop. I've been in a situation where we were in the middle of a workshop and a tornado warning happened, and we had to literally take shelter. And then you're deciding, okay, do we keep going afterwards? What do we do? So there's a lot of emergency preparation work, I think, that the workshop facilitators have to do too. And all of those become funny, but each one of them teaches you something. So I really believe in preparation and not kidding yourself around what's really going on. As long as you're brave enough to talk about what's really going on, you'll get to the right stuff.
So if I hear you correctly, the mindset would then be courage and mental agility, or dealing with uncertainty.
Yeah, I think it's courage, authenticity, and being so prepared that you can just pivot easily. I've been in the middle of a workshop in fact, this happened. I was at an executive retreat. We'd all gone off site. The theme for the workshop was strategic planning. And what quickly became clear halfway through the first day was there was a lot of hurt in the relationships. There had been a lot of harm done in the relationships. And because I teach how to have difficult conversations and how to create psychological safety, I literally closed the one deck, went into my laptop, found the other deck, and pivoted and changed what we were talking about, with their permission, of course. But it was like, hey, what it sounds like is really needed here is this content. And so the other thing I encourage you to do is have all of your workshops on your laptop, because you may find yourself having to pivot in the middle of something. And again, to this day, that organization talks about that being the crucial moment that changed everything for them and addressed the real problem and got them moving forward in a way that was really powerful.
Yeah. With everything that you've done so far, how would you describe the future of facilitation?
I think technology is going to continue to give us some more new and different ways to engage learners, right? I think VR is something that's really an important part of our learning strategy right now, and everyone needs to be thinking about how to leverage the power of virtual reality. It's not the right thing for everything, but if you're trying to change behavior or give people some experience with emotional intelligence and relationships or geophysical space, it's a really great tool that's not matched by anything. But again, technology is going to give us new bells and whistles. Underneath it all, real teaching, real facilitation is about people listening to each other and then creating an experience that moves folks from point A to point B, right? So we can never let the bells and whistles override understanding the real needs and goals, truly knowing your audience, and where they are when they enter the room and where they need to be when you're done. Like, there's just no making up for that. I think the future of facilitation is those of us who are good at that will continue to be really valued assets. And we can also play with the bells and whistles to add sparkle, but to never skip over those really important questions and conversations we need to have before the workshop launches.
Yeah, I hear you. And what I hear is that if we really put the purpose and the participants in the core of what we do, then it doesn't actually matter whether we do it offline or online. So the facilitation skills we need are just the same.
Absolutely. Sometimes you have to think through the trickiness of, in fact, I'm doing this right now because I'm in the middle of a global rollout for a manager training with a company, and they want to keep the momentum moving, but we no longer are meeting in person. We were flying people into a city and having these 2-day sessions. And so it was a really good conversation. And it was like, okay, I can still deliver content virtually. We can use some of the features of some of the online platforms to create little discussion rooms and all of that. And I said, but, what's emotionally going on with your team? And do they have the bandwidth to lean into this right now? And we are going to lose some of those, coffee break conversations that are part of networking and the culture. Where are we at with that? And ultimately they realized, okay, we want to give people something right now because we started on this journey with them and we want to make sure people feel supported. But yeah, we don't want to give that up. So what we've decided to do is add a little extra session in the middle. We're going to push back the in-person dates to be after we get through all this craziness. And right now we're going to create an online conversation around dealing with change, dealing with the unknown, self-care. And we're just going to create a supportive experience using virtual tools to meet people where they're at, but we're not trying to shove the manager training into an online experience. And that felt like the right thing to do right now. And I'm glad we had that conversation and we were really listening to the needs of the employees.
Yeah. What I have the impression is the beauty of physical meetings, being in the same space together, especially when there are large groups, is the magic that happens through random encounters. At one point, you're standing in line for coffee and you turn around and you start speaking to someone you wouldn't have spoken to otherwise.
Yeah.
Do you have an idea or a trick on how to create this randomness in the virtual space?
Well, I would say there's two things. I would add to that, in addition to those spontaneous conversations and networking opportunities that people just don't do during their regular work time. Mm-hmm. So by bringing people together, you're creating that. Mm-hmm. In addition, biologically, there's something that happens when we're in the same space with each other, right? We really are a tribal species. And even though our technology has evolved to the point where you and I live across the world from each other, and yet I can see you right now and you can hear me and we're having this interaction, our bodies are built for in-person. We're meant to be tribes that live with each other. So our brains can read micromuscular differences on our facial expressions that get lost on a 2D screen. Scientists know that all kinds of stuff gets communicated between us with pheromones, stuff we can't even see. And even on a neurological level, teams achieve this thing called neural synchrony, where their brain regions and their brain waves, if they're functioning well as a team, they achieve this thing called neural synchrony. Well, scientists aren't quite sure how that happens. It could be that electrical pulses are being sent between our skulls and letting that happen. But we do know, and I think we've all felt, that when we're in person with a person, it feels a little different. And I think science is still discovering what that intangible thing is, but it's real. And so as much as I believe in using technology, I am never going to say we should never have in-person trainings, because I know biologically, particularly when people are first building trust with each other, that all of those signals is what our brain was built to read. And establishing psychological safety with each other, starting to build trust, that goes much smoother and faster through in-person interactions. And now we have global teams. It's not always cost effective to bring people together in person. Then you have to overcompensate for that deficit by having more online meetings and more intentional getting to know you conversations that would normally happen organically.
Yeah.
And then to your other question, when you do have people in the room, a lot of it has to do with the questions and the activities you do. So I really believe in having people do self-reflection and then sharing their self-reflection and then having the table kind of share and then talking about their own best practices. We harvest a lot of expertise and knowledge sharing. Mm-hmm. And inevitably at the break time, I make sure that we always have an activity right before we go to break, whether it's the end of the day break or the overnight break or the 10-minute coffee break. Inevitably, the conversation they were just in continues as they stand up and walk away. So I design that intentionally. And then when I bring people together again, the very first question I ask is, so what has become clear since we last were together? Because the brain has lots of insights that happen. In fact, it's usually when we stop thinking or working on something that we have those aha moments. So I like to harvest the aha moments by giving people a specific question to answer around that.
Would you then, I love the fact that you designed the moment before the coffee break. Would you then also intentionally create specific groups so that, for instance, you can bridge silos, or you can bring those together who would benefit from talking to each other during the coffee break? How would you do that?
Well, so it depends on, again, the training that I'm creating. So right now, I have this brain aware manager training that I do. And each time we come together, the instructions for who to sit with change. So sometimes it's sit with people you've never met. Sometimes it's sit with people you work with regularly, sit with someone on your team. It's all designed based on the theme of the day and what I know I'm going to be bringing out of the activities. So it's all very intentional. But inevitably, they're sitting at tables. And so when they get up to go to the break, they stand up together and walk together somewhere. And inevitably, those conversations with the people that they were just with continue. And then also they scatter a little bit to connect with someone else in the room that they're not sitting with. So it all works out in a great way.
Beautiful. I haven't asked you yet the question, but I would be very curious. If you were to give yourself a hashtag with all this journey that you went through, what hashtag would you give yourself?
That's easy. The hashtag is potential.
Potential.
Because I've always believed in helping people bring out the best in themselves. I'm always about helping people rise to their potential. I think we do that through learning and leadership development. But I always see the potential in everyone and how much there is, we all have room to grow. Even if you're achieving success right now, you still have potential for more. So potential is kind of the core of the work that I do.
Beautiful. When you look back to the beginning of your career, what would you have liked to know before starting your journey as a facilitator?
I'm a big believer in everything unfolds as exactly as it should. So all the insights that I gained through my experience, I got them at the right moments that I was supposed to get them. So I don't know if I would do anything different. Probably the only thing I would say is trust it. Just trust the journey. It is going to unfold perfectly. So just trust it and let it happen. Even like I now am a specialist in the neuroscience of learning, but that's not my PhD. I came to that when I was a chief learning officer and wanted to improve my craft. And that's when I started studying the neuroscience and of learning and what it could teach us. But since then, I've gone back to study the neuroscience of change and the neuroscience of what brings out the best in teams. And so even that, it's like, I trusted my instinct at the time to explore that. And I've trusted that journey of that aha moment that I had around it and continue to have. So I think just trust your gut and pay attention and listen and it will all unfold as it should. And don't be afraid to learn yourself. The other thing I truly believe in is that whoever we're facilitating, they can only grow to the extent that we have grown or willing to grow. So that there is, if there's stuff that you're not addressing, so for example, if I'm going to facilitate a workshop on communication skills or having difficult conversations, I always look at myself and say, okay, where do I need to work on my own communication? Or is there a difficult conversation I'm not having? Because I got to clear that before I walk in the room. If I don't go to the places I'm trying to lead other people, they won't get there. So I also have learned over time by just kind of seeing it, if I'm stuck, I will make the group stuck. So I always have to kind of hold myself accountable before I leave the room that I've done the work that I'm asking them to do.
Self-coaching.
Yeah, or self-growth. We always have to be willing to grow ourselves. That's what I love about the Learning Tribe is that I think we are, that's already how we are, right? We're curious. We love to listen. We love to grow. I think
self-selection. Otherwise, we wouldn't do what we're doing.
Yeah. So I think we already have joy in that. But I think that there's a real responsibility that we never ask someone to do work we ourselves have not yet done.
Walking the path. Walking the walk.
For sure.
Wonderful. Is there anything in our conversation that you have the impression that we haven't addressed and that you would like to share with the audience?
No, I mean, you're great at asking these questions, and I love your style and how we followed breadcrumbs to come to different things. Yeah, I don't think there's anything I would add. I would just say, for those of you who do facilitation, I would encourage you to check out my book. I think it's got a lot of great brain-based tips and strategies that will reinforce what you're already doing and maybe give you a couple new ideas. Other than that, no, I think we've had a lovely conversation. It's been wonderful meeting.
Yes, and I will put all the links to your resources and the freebie and the book into the show notes.
Fantastic.
If someone in the audience fell asleep after minute 1, just woke up and doesn't have time to listen to our entire conversation again, what would you like them to take away?
I would say being a great workshop designer and leader is all about listening, asking the right questions, listening to what is said and unsaid, and realizing that that's what you're designing for. And then it's about going in the room with a plan that's flexible enough that you can pivot to address the unexpected. And I think that'll do you just fine.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time, your energy, and your sharing your experience of it. It was a joy.
Thank you, Miriam, and lovely to meet you, and good luck with everything you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you for staying tuned and listening to the show. I appreciate your attention, as I know how busy you are. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and engage by sharing your comments and thoughts, and visit workshops.work to download the one-page summary. I'm looking forward to seeing you back at the next episode, and I wish you a fruitful day.